The doctor looked at the x-rays and shook his head. 4 extra incisors. The boy's parents asked if they should remove them. The doctor paused, then said something that would change music history forever. Leave them. You never know what gift they might give him. That boy would become the greatest rock voice the world has ever known. But the teeth everyone mocked? They were just the beginning of what made Freddie Mercury hide from the world and simultaneously conquer it. Zanzibar, 1956. A 5-year-old boy sat alone in the corner of St. Peter's School playground, his hand covering his mouth. His name was Farrokh Bulsara, and he had just learnt that being different meant being a target. The other children had noticed his teeth, the way they pushed forward, creating a distinctive overbite that made him look different from everyone else. His teacher, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, a fictional character but one who represents the many educators who shaped young lives in colonial Zanzibar, noticed the boy's isolation. She approached him during lunch break, sitting beside him on the stone steps overlooking the Indian Ocean. "Why don't you play with the others, Farrokh?" she asked gently. The boy kept his hand over his mouth, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of shame and defiance. "They laugh at my teeth, miss." Mrs. Henderson had seen this before. Children could be cruel about differences. But there was something about this particular child that struck her as extraordinary. Even in his silence, even with his hand covering his face, there was an intensity to him, a presence that seemed too large for his small frame. "Do you know what makes a lion the king of the jungle?" she asked him. Farrokh looked up, confused by the question. He shook his head. "It's not because he looks like all the other animals. It's because he's different. He has a mane that no other creature possesses. He has a roar that shakes the earth. The very thing that makes him different is what makes him magnificent." The boy considered this, his hand slowly lowering from his mouth. "But lions don't go to school with hyenas who make fun of them." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "No, they don't. But one day those hyenas will pay to hear that lion roar. Remember that, Farrokh. One day they'll pay to hear you." The boy didn't believe her. Not then, but he never forgot those words. London, 1969. Farrokh Bulsara, now going by the name Freddie, stood backstage at a small venue in Kensington, his stomach churning with anxiety. He was about to audition for a band called Smile, and everything in his body screamed at him to run. The band's guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor were setting up their equipment. They had agreed to hear this eccentric art student who had been following them around, praising their music and offering unsolicited advice on their performances. They expected nothing. After all, dozens of wannabe musicians haunted the London music scene, all convinced they were the next big thing. Freddie walked onto the small stage, his platform shoes clicking against the wooden floor. He wore a silk scarf despite the warm evening, and his dark hair fell past his shoulders. But it was his posture that caught Brian's attention first. For someone so flamboyant in dress, Freddie held himself with an unusual tension, as if he was simultaneously trying to be seen and to disappear. "All right then," Roger said, twirling a drumstick. "Let's hear what you've got." Freddie picked up the microphone, and for a moment he froze. His hand instinctively moved toward his mouth, an old habit from childhood. Then he remembered Mrs. Henderson's words from 13 years earlier. The lion's roar, the thing that makes you different. He closed his eyes and sang. What happened next? Neither Brian nor Roger could have anticipated. The voice that emerged from this nervous, teeth-conscious art student wasn't just good. It was otherworldly. It had power and vulnerability, aggression and tenderness, all wrapped into a 4-octave range that seemed to defy human anatomy. Brian and Roger exchanged glances. They didn't need to discuss it. They both knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. When Freddie finished, he opened his eyes tentatively, waiting for the judgment he'd spent his whole life receiving. Instead, Brian said simply, "When can you start?" That night marked the death of Farrokh Bulsara and the birth of Freddie Mercury. But the boy who hid his mouth never really left. He just learned to hide in plain sight, behind costumes and personas and characters that allowed him to be everything except vulnerable. Abbey Road Studios, 1975. It was 3 a.m, and the rest of Queen had gone home hours ago. Freddie remained, sitting in the control room, listening to the same vocal track for the 100th time. The song was Bohemian Rhapsody, and it was consuming him. Roy Thomas Baker, their producer, watched with a mixture of admiration and concern. He had worked with dozens of artists, but he had never seen anyone torture themselves quite like Freddie Mercury. "Freddie, it's perfect," Roy said, not for the first time that night. "We've recorded over 180 separate vocal tracks. You've sung this section 47 times. It's brilliant. Freddie shook his head, his eyes fixed on the mixing board. It's not right. Listen here. At 2:47, the harmony is slightly flat. It needs to be redone. Roy listened. He heard nothing wrong. But he had learned that arguing with Freddie about vocals was pointless. The man heard things that didn't exist to normal ears. Or perhaps more accurately, he heard the perfect version in his head and couldn't rest until reality matched that internal vision. Why do you do this to yourself? Roy asked quietly. Why can't you just be satisfied? Freddie turned to him, and for a moment the mask slipped. The confident, larger-than-life rock star disappeared, replaced by a vulnerable man wrestling with demons Roy couldn't see. Because if it's perfect, Freddie said softly, they won't notice the imperfections. They won't see the boy with the teeth. They won't see Farrokh. They'll only see the performance. Roy understood then. This wasn't about music. This was about armor. Every perfect vocal, every flawless performance, every outrageous costume was a wall between the world and the vulnerable person beneath. What if they want to see Farrokh? Roy suggested. Freddie smiled sadly and put the headphones back on. Then they'd be disappointed. Now, let's do take 48. Wembley Stadium, July 13th, 1985. 100,000 people filled every seat, with nearly 2 billion watching on television around the world. Live Aid, the biggest concert in history, and Queen had been given a 20-minute slot that most critics thought would be their swan song. Their latest album had underperformed, and music critics had declared them past their prime. Relics of the 70s trying to survive in the age of MTV and synthesizers. Backstage, Freddie stood alone in front of a mirror. He was wearing a white tank top and jeans, simple by his standards. His throat hurt. He had been battling a throat infection for days, and his doctor had advised him not to perform at all. But this was Live Aid. This was the chance to remind the world who Queen was. But more than that, this was the chance to prove something to himself. A stagehand, a young woman named Sarah Collins, knocked on his dressing room door. Mr. Mercury, 5 minutes. Freddie turned from the mirror. Tell me something honestly. Do you know who I am? Sarah blinked, surprised by the question. Of course, you're Freddie Mercury. No, Freddie said, shaking his head. Before today, did you know Queen's music? Sarah hesitated, then admitted. My parents do. They have your old albums. But my friends, we mostly listen to Duran Duran and Wham. Freddie nodded slowly. So we're your parents' music now. I didn't mean... No, you're honest. I appreciate that. He stood up, adjusting his tank top. In 20 minutes, I'm going to change your mind. Tell your friends to watch. Sarah smiled politely, the way you smile at someone making an impossible promise. Freddie walked toward the stage, his heart pounding. This was it. 20 minutes to prove that the boy with the teeth, the Parsi immigrant, the art student who was told he'd never make it, could still make 100,000 people move as one. He climbed the stairs to the stage, and the roar of the crowd hit him like a physical force. He grabbed the microphone, looked out at the sea of humanity, and then did something unexpected. He didn't sing, he vocalized. A single note. Ayo! The crowd, confused, echoed back. Ayo! Freddie smiled. He had them. He sang another phrase, more complex. The crowd repeated it. Then another, and another. For 2 full minutes, Freddie Mercury conducted 100,000 people like an orchestra, their voices becoming his instrument. Brian, Roger and John began playing the opening chords of Bohemian Rhapsody. And the next 18 minutes became the stuff of legend. Freddie commanded that stage like a monarch, his voice somehow stronger despite the infection, his presence magnetic despite the simple outfit, his connection with the audience absolute despite performing at a benefit concert where most people came for other acts. When they finished with We Are the Champions, the entire stadium was on its feet. Backstage, performers who were supposed to follow Queen looked at each other in dismay. How do you follow that? Sarah found Freddie as he came off stage, drenched in sweat, barely able to speak from exhaustion. She didn't say anything. She just smiled and held up her backstage pass. On it she had written in marker, I believe now. Freddie took the pass, looked at it, and for the first time in his career, he allowed himself to believe too, not in Freddie Mercury the performer, but in Farrokh Bulsara the person. The boy with the teeth had finally roared loud enough for the whole world to hear. Munich, 1986. Freddie sat in a private clinic, staring at the test results in his hands. The words blurred together, but one stood out with crystal clarity. Positive. HIV, AIDS, the plague that was decimating the gay community, the disease that had no cure, no hope, only stigma and death. The doctor, Dr. Heinrich Müller, sat across from him, his face professionally neutral but his eyes betraying sympathy. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercury. Given the current progression, I would estimate you have 5 to 7 years, perhaps less." Freddie folded the paper carefully, as if by making it neat he could somehow organize the chaos now flooding through him. Who knows? Just the clinic staff, and we're bound by doctor-patient confidentiality. Good. Freddie stood up. It stays that way. "Mr. Mercury, you should tell your close friends, your family. You'll need support." "No." Freddie's voice was firm. "I've spent my entire life being different, being judged, being the other. I won't spend my death that way too. I'll tell people when I'm ready, on my terms." For the next 5 years, Freddie Mercury kept the biggest secret of his life. He continued recording, continued performing when he could, continued living with an intensity that burned even brighter, knowing time was running out. His bandmates noticed changes. The weight loss, the fatigue, the mysterious illnesses that came and went. But Freddie deflected every question with humor or anger, whichever worked to keep them at a distance. Only his partner Jim Hutton knew the truth. And it was Jim who held him through the nights when the pain became unbearable, when the medication stopped working, when the reality of his mortality crashed through all the walls he had built. "Do you regret it?" Jim asked one night in 1990 as they sat in Freddie's garden at his Kensington home. "Not telling the world earlier?" Freddie thought about this for a long time. "I regret many things. I regret every moment I wasted caring what people thought about my teeth, about my heritage, about who I loved. But I don't regret controlling my own narrative. They'll know when I'm gone. And then the only thing left will be the music." Metropolis Studios, London, May 1991. Freddie could barely stand, but he was determined to record one more vocal track. The song was "The Show Must Go On," and its lyrics felt prophetically personal. "Inside my heart is breaking, my makeup may be flaking, but my smile still stays on." Brian had written the song, but he was hesitant to ask Freddie to sing it. The man could barely walk from his car to the studio. How could he possibly sing a song that required such vocal power? "Freddie, maybe we should wait," Brian suggested gently, "until you're feeling stronger." Freddie shook his head. He poured himself a vodka, drank it in one gulp and said, "I'll do it now, darling. You just watch." He walked into the vocal booth, and for a moment Brian feared they had made a terrible mistake. Freddie looked so frail, so diminished from the powerful presence who had commanded Wembley Stadium just 6 years earlier. Then Freddie began to sing. What emerged was impossible. Despite the illness ravaging his body, despite the pain that was evident in every movement, Freddie's voice soared with power and emotion that brought tears to everyone in the studio. He sang about continuing despite everything, about refusing to surrender, about keeping the performance going even when everything inside is breaking. He recorded the entire vocal track in a single take. When he finished, he came out of the booth, smiled weakly at Brian, and said, "That's how you do it." Those would be some of his last recorded words. November 23, 1991. Freddie released a statement to the press. Following the enormous conjecture in the press over the last 2 weeks, I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private to date to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has come now for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth, and I hope that everyone will join with me, my doctors and all those worldwide in the fight against this terrible disease. 24 hours later, Freddie Mercury died at his home, surrounded by those who loved him, finally free from the secret that had defined his final years. The world mourned. Not just fans, but people who had never appreciated Queen's music suddenly understood what had been lost. The boy with the teeth, the Parsi immigrant, the man who hid behind personas and performances had left behind something that couldn't be hidden or diminished, a voice that transcended time, culture, and even death itself. Today, those 4 extra incisors that young Farrokh tried so hard to hide are considered one of the anatomical features that gave Freddie Mercury his distinctive voice. The thing he was most ashamed of became his greatest gift. Mrs. Henderson's prediction came true. The world did pay to hear him roar. They still do. Decades after his death, Freddie Mercury's voice continues to move millions. His performances are studied as masterclasses in artistry, and his courage in living authentically despite fear and judgment inspires new generations. But perhaps his greatest legacy isn't the music, It's the reminder that the things we try to hide about ourselves, the imperfections we're ashamed of, the differences that make us feel like outsiders, these are often the very things that make us extraordinary. Freddie Mercury spent his life trying to be perfect so people wouldn't notice his flaws. In the end, it was his willingness to finally be imperfect, to be vulnerable, to be human that made him immortal. The boy who covered his mouth became the man whose voice will echo forever. That's the power of embracing what makes you different. That's the power of the raw. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of viewers who celebrate the legends who changed the world, not despite their differences, but because of them. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. We love connecting with our global audience. Have you ever hidden a part of yourself that turned out to be your greatest strength? Share your story in the comments. And remember, the world doesn't need another copy. It needs the original you, teeth and all. Until next time, keep celebrating the legends hiding in plain sight.